Our focus this hour is Northeast Africa and the turmoil unfolding in Sudan. This hour, a temporary ceasefire is due to run out, and we're watching whether that will signal a resumption of the violence that has reportedly killed at least 61 people and wounded some 670 others. A power struggle between Sudan's armed forces and a large paramilitary group finally boiled over yesterday, raising fears of an all-out civil war in a country and new instability in the surrounding region. Saudi Arabia's foreign affairs minister has hit the phones talking to the commanders of both sides, urging them to find a peaceful resolution. Egypt and South Sudan are also offering to mediate. 3 UN workers with the World Food Programme are among those killed, prompting an angry online post from its executive director who says, quote, "Aid workers should never be a target. All parties in Sudan must come to an agreement that ensures the safety of humanitarian staff."
Rapid support forces accuse the Sudanese armed forces with beginning this fight, but until now we do not know exactly which force have begun shooting.
Sudan's army has sent tanks onto the streets and fighter jets into the skies to try and take back control. But the paramilitary group is fighting claims to have taken control of Khartoum's international airport and presidential palace. The country has seen 4 actual or attempted coups since 2019, and this latest unrest comes as tensions boil over about the best way to return to civilian rule. The CBC's Dominic Valitis leads off our coverage.
Fierce fighting has been reported again in Khartoum today. This morning, the army and its rival, the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, are both claiming they control the airport and several other key strategic buildings in the capital, including the presidential palace and the state television station. Earlier, we spoke to Hamid Khalafallah, non-resident fellow at the Tahrir Institute for Middle East Policy. He's in Khartoum right now, and here's how he described the situation.
We have been living through very stressful times. We have been hearing non-stop sounds of gunfire, bombings, jet fighters flying over our houses. And, you know, just in the case of our house this morning, we found bullets hitting one of the outdoor rooms.
That's the situation in the capital, but the fighting is as widespread as it is fierce. For example, heavy artillery was heard in the adjoining city of Omdurman and Bahri again this morning, while gunfire has been reported in the Red Sea city of Port Sudan. The army says its jets are continuing to strike RSF bases in various locations around the country. Indeed, it bombed another near the capital this morning. In terms of casualty numbers, more than 50 civilians have been killed and hundreds more wounded since fighting broke out yesterday. Among the dead, 3 employees of the UN's World Food Programme, which announced today it was temporarily halting operations in the country in response. So fighting is fierce, it's widespread, and the human cost is high. There are real concerns now, serious concerns that the country could be heading for all-out civil war. The US, China and Russia have all called for an immediate end to hostilities. The United Nations, the European Union and the African Union have also expressed grave concerns about the situation, with the latter due to hold an emergency meeting later today. Dominic Valitis, CBC News, London.
For more, we're joined now by Khalid Meidani. He's a Sudanese academic who teaches political science and Islamic studies at McGill University. He's written numerous books on Sudan, and we've reached him today in Montreal. Thank you so much for making some time for us. We do appreciate this.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So Khalid, maybe it's best here just to start with a bit of an explanation, if you can, about what it is that's driving this, what's behind the fighting.
Well, I think, as you mentioned in the earlier statement, the dispute is really over the leadership of the military itself, and a dispute is essentially a power struggle between the head of the armed forces and Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, whose nickname is Hemeti, well known as Hemeti, who is the head of this paramilitary militia. And the catalyst of all of this conflict, and it has been brewing for a number of months, if not years, has to do with the issue of security sector reform. On the one side, you have the Sudanese armed forces under Abdel Fattah Burhan, who wanted to integrate fully these militias, and Hemeti, who of course has refused and wanted to maintain the autonomy. So within the context of a framework that was supposed to usher in a civilian government and elections in 2 years, this really is the catalyst, the issue of security sector reform and the failure to agree on that. That led last month, at the end of the last month, the deployment on the part of Hemeti of his militia in the capital itself, and a few days before in the airbase in northern Sudan. And that was really the catalyst that led the Sudanese armed forces to attack his militias, basically to try to eliminate their rival in the lead up to this interim transitional period, if it does in fact occur.
And Khalid, you are not only an expert on all of this, of course, but this is also very personal for you because you have family in Sudan. How is this impacting them right now?
I think everyone is in complete shock, primarily because of the severity of the conflict, but also that this is really unprecedented in terms of this kind of violence in the capital city itself. Although it has witnessed a lot of course, different forms of protest and even some skirmishes. But this kind of wide-scale conflict within the capital city has led not only to all of these deaths, at least over 50, probably more, in the capital itself, but people are trapped in their homes. Some, of course, are caught in the crossfire. Others that have no access to water, to food, to supplies, to medicine. And so the humanitarian consequences, not only for Khartoum, but of course, the outlying areas like Darfur are really unprecedented. And this really requires a great deal of attention and, I would argue, intervention.
Have you heard from family members who are in Sudan right now about what it is like to be there, to be in the capital, and to be not only witnessing all this, but hearing it as well?
I have. I'm on the phone constantly, just a few minutes before we got on air and all day yesterday. And of course, there is the kind of fear in terms of the physical aspects and the lack of supplies, but there's also a great deal of, frankly, trauma and emotional shock. And very few people know when this will end. And if it continues, of course, it'll be worse and worse. People are trying to help each other as much as possible in terms of distributing phone numbers for people caught in the street, for example, if they need shelter. And food, if that is possible. But that is going to increasingly be important as this conflict continues in the capital city and throughout the country, not only the capital city.
Well, and let's talk about that a little bit, because you did mention, of course, Darfur. We've heard from the UN's World Food Program that 3 of its workers have been killed, so it has paused its humanitarian operations there. There's also this humanitarian corridor that's been open for 3 hours, but has now closed. Help us understand how this is going to impact people when those aid workers are no longer on the ground or operating as they usually would be. What sort of impact is that going to have?
Well, the impact for regions like Darfur, there are 2 things to keep in mind. Number one, Darfur is actually where the militia of Hemeti has its greatest or largest base. That's where they started. They're part and parcel of the militia that devastated Darfur throughout the civil conflicts there, leading to 200,000 deaths. So you can imagine the number of people there who are displaced and refugees and how poverty-stricken it is, reliant almost exclusively on aid and the World Food Program. And so this kind of exit and attack against the World Food Program, of course, is a strategic political act in order to kick out any kind of UN agencies and to silence the international community from their attention there. But as a practical matter, of course, on a daily basis, it'll increase not only food insecurity, but hunger, devastation, displacement. This is a very, very poor and also very volatile part of the country and of the region.
And that broader region, of course, like I was just saying, we've already heard from officials in Saudi Arabia who are working their phones, trying to be speaking with both sides, trying to find some sort of resolution here. Help us understand what the impact could be for the wider region.
Oh, the impact is huge. I mean, we're talking about the Gulf countries, the Arab countries, Egypt. We're talking about South Sudan, East Africa. We're talking about China, that's been long involved in the region, and even Russia, that has historically, or at least in the last couple of years, supported in indirect and direct ways the militia leader Hemeti. So you have a number of different actors, regional and global, that are looking at Sudan and the potential instability it will cause. For Egypt, of course, it has the potential to destabilize that border area. For South Sudan, that relies on oil transport throughout the country of Sudan to actually export its oil, its most important resource, that will be a huge problem from South Sudan. And for, of course, Ethiopia, that is just still very fragile in terms of its own civil conflict recently. This is why you have not only Middle East actors, but also East African and Southern Sudan all coming together, trying to intervene and stop this kind of conflict from spilling over.
You made the remark just a couple of minutes ago that you think there's an argument here for some sort of international intervention. In what form would you like that to take? What do you think that should look like?
I think the primary form is that it has to be a very robust diplomatic intervention, but not a military intervention. We know proxy militias and militias like this, including the army, this kind of conflicts are sustained over a long period of time if there's logistical or military, even financial intervention. What we need is a much more robust diplomatic intervention on the part of huge stakeholders in the region, including in the Gulf, in Egypt, and in East Africa, through the regional bloc of IGAD that is based in East Africa, Kenya and South Sudan as well. A robust intervention that's diplomatic, that not only offers incentives for them to come together, for these two generals to come together, but also some stakes, some threat of sanctions, if not direct sanctions against these individuals. Because what is happening now is not a civil war so far. It really is a power struggle between two very, let's just put it this way, power-hungry individuals who have a thirst for power and are holding the Sudanese population ransom. So their focus should be on them, both in terms of incentives to have a ceasefire and diplomatic talks, but also, I would argue, a threat of sanctions against these individuals by stakeholders who have a great influence in the region.
Khalid, thank you for this. We really do appreciate your time and your perspective, and we certainly hope that your family members who are in Sudan right now, that they stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Khalid Madani is a Sudanese academic who teaches political science and Islamic studies at McGill University.